Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Hartwell. I am a Soldatov Fellow at LSE IDEAS. Welcome to another Russia-Ukraine dialogue. Today we'll focus on the anti-war movements in Russia and to a smaller degree, Belarus. Putin's actions are undoubtedly having major consequences that are detrimental to Russia and Russian society at large. Since the February escalation, approximately 200,000 Russians have abandoned their homes and jobs for fear of being persecuted as scum and national traitors. According to the Institute of International Finance, the Russian economy will shrink 15% this year and another 3% next year as a direct result of Western sanctions, the exodus of major companies, the Russian brain drain, and of course, the collapse of exports. In a word, Putin's decision to escalate the Russia-Ukraine war in February resulted in wiping out the equivalent of 15 years of economic gains. While the Russian economy continues to stagnate, the political system is moving rapidly from an authoritarian to a totalitarian system. Total control of the Russian state and society seems to be most obvious in the domain of messaging surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war. The term war is forbidden, and those who dare to speak out against the Kremlin's special operation face long jail terms. Yet, despite unprecedented measures to manage the war narrative, there are still many brave anti-war voices in Russia, Belarus, and the diaspora. To discuss the anti-war movements, I would like to welcome three very distinguished guests, all three of them Russians, to the table. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Ella Rossman, a doctoral student at the University College London's School of Slavonic and East European Studies. She was previously a researcher and a lecturer at the Faculty of Humanities in Higher School of Economics, Moscow. Ella's research is now focused on late Soviet girlhood. She's also writing about feminism in post-Soviet Russia. Secondly, I'd like to welcome Lolja Nordic, a multidisciplinary artist and ecofeminist activist from St. Petersburg, advocating for climate change, gender equality, human rights, and animal rights. Lolja is a speaker and co-organizer of many grassroots feminist, environmentalist, and LGBTQ+ protests, cultural and educational events. She's also co-organizer and curator of international DIY charity music festival Ne Vinovata, Not Her Fault, in support of domestic violence survivors. She's an anti-war activist and co-founder of the international feminist anti-war resistance movement, which was created on the 25th of March this year to protest Putin's war in Ukraine. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome Andrei, Soldatov, a non-resident senior fellow with the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. He is a Russian investigative journalist, co-founder and editor of Agentura.ru, a watchdog of Russian Secret Service activities. He has been covering secret services and terrorism issues since 1999. In October 2012, Agentura.ru, Privacy International, and Citizen Lab launched the joint project Russia's Surveillance State, with Andrei as head of the project to undertake research and investigation into surveillance practices in Russia, including the trade in and the use of surveillance technologies. Thank you to all three of those guests for joining us. I'd first like to give the floor to Ella Rossman. Ella, what is going on in the anti-war movements in Russia and Belarus? What has changed in the past 3 months? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you for having me. I will be speaking mostly about Russia because, to be very honest, I'm not a specialist in Belarus, and I think I can't speak. I can't speak about Belarus. So yeah, and I will be speaking not only as a, I think it's called early career scholar, but also as a member of the feminist anti-war resistance. I'm also the member of this organization. So the Russian polls and the Russian leaders, the state polls, I mean, right? They try to provide the picture that the absolute majority of Russians support this war, that there is no any kind of anti-war resistance inside of Russia, and it's only in the media they say that it's only this kind of resistance, it's mostly their influence from abroad, and it's mostly, you know, this like kind of spies, their agents from abroad who are doing this. Of course, this is not true. It might be true that the majority of Russians are not vocal about their anti-war position or about their thoughts, also because we have quite repressive laws, which makes this freedom of speech, freedom of opinion impossible. For example, when the war started, our government immediately established a law which prohibits spreading fake information about the Russian army. And now if you spread any kind of information which is not in line with the Ministry of Defense information, you can go to jail for up to 15 years. So yeah, this it's not really easy to say what the majority of Russians think, but I would say that despite all these repressions, despite the persecutions, we still have anti-war resistance inside Russia. And I would say that there are many different political organizations who created this their own anti-war organizations. There is a liberal wing. I mean, I think this wing is the most visible on the international arena, as they are very vocal. Many of the members of this anti-war resistance, they live abroad, so they can't communicate with the journalists abroad. So yeah, we have this liberal wing, but we also have those organizations which are more in the shadow, but they still exist. For example, students anti-war resistance group. We have the group Vesna. It was an oppositional group. Even it existed before the war, but now they also organize the anti-war resistance. We have our feminist anti-war resistance group, and actually I would say that feminists, queer activists, they are quite active in their anti-war activities in Russia. And we also have organizations about those I can't really it's impossible even to gather information, and it's too dangerous to do this. But there are signs that these organizations exist, and these are organizations which organize sabotage, welfare sabotage in Russia. For example, there is an organization which is called Останови вагоны. It can be translated as stop the carriages, stop the wagons. It's an organization which organizes sabotage on the railways in Russia. And there is also the organization which is called the Revolutionary Organization of Povolzhia. It's like this area around Volga. So there are these organizations, and in Russian news, in Russian media, we every day can see news about railways being blown up, about institutions which are connected with warfare being vandalized or blowing up. So yeah, there is also this part of anti-war resistance which is going on in darkness, and we can't even gather the information about this. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was a good introduction to kind of kick us off. Let's turn to Lolja next. Lolja, you've recently fled to Russia, and you're currently located in the Baltics and Lithuania. Tell us about your activism, especially with regards to your anti-war activism, and why have you left Russia at this particular moment in time? Thank you, Lolja.
Hi, thank you again for having me on this discussion. I had to flee Russia because there was a criminal case made up against me by secret police, which is called and is known as a phone terrorism case. So I'm a suspect on this case. I'm still a suspect, and it was a risk for me to go to jail up to 5 years. I was oppressed by secret police during the whole last year. I had 4 arrests. I had 2 house searched, 2 house raids. I was followed by people from secret police. So a lot of weird things were going on. I spent some nights at the police station. So they were after me like for a year, even though I've been in the activism for years by now. But this constant oppression, it started like a year ago. So for me, it was a red line, because of course I was thinking if I should or shouldn't leave the country. But I made this decision because I understood that I don't want to spend time in jail where I can do nothing and I can do no work. And choosing between going to jail for a long period of time and temporarily fleeing the country and being able to do the work that I do online from the distance and from the place where I am now, I prefer to do the work and to be available as an activist than to go to jail. So I'm not the only suspect in this case. There are plenty of people who are also the suspect of this terrorism case. And some of them have left the country temporarily. Some of them are still in Russia and they're in great danger because anytime they can get arrested again. So it's kind of a serious situation. And I guess that sometimes people from Europe, they don't realize like the threats that local activists are facing. And I think that happens because these people sometimes are not really into the context of what's going on.
Thank you, Lolja. We'll ask you more about some of those other Russian activists also in exile in a bit. But first, let's turn to Andrei Soldatov. Andrei, recently the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs added you to their wanted list. The same thing occurred to two Russian exiles, Michael Naki and Ruslan Leviev. What exactly happened, and what do you make of the Kremlin's actions? Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Well, what is happening right now is that starting last year, we have seen the largest exodus of Russian journalists from the country. And as I said, it started before the war because the Russian government introduced some new repressive legislation and also sent some journalists to jail. And journalists, especially investigative journalists, understood that it was not feasible anymore to stay in the country and to keep doing what we should do, to do our job. Once the war started, many of my colleagues who found themselves out of the country decided to do what we need to do to investigate the Russian invasion. My job, as you said, I've been covering the Russian security services since 1999. I believe that my job was to investigate the role of the Russian security services in the beginning of the war, especially the way the war started, how Putin was informed about the political situation in Kiev, how the invasion was prepared by the Russian intelligence and security services. And well, we did a lot of stories, especially in March, and the government obviously and the security services became very unhappy with that. So we blocked our website and they started a criminal investigation. The criminal investigation was started by the FSB, which is the main security agency in the country. But what we have now is something I would say a bit more optimistic, because just because so many people, so many journalists left the country and keep active, it means that people who are still in the country, but who feel that this war is horrible, should be stopped. These people who are critical of the Kremlin, they rely on the information provided by journalists who are now in exile. And they see the impact of the reporting we are doing, millions of views on YouTube. We see that Telegram channels launched by Russian journalists in exile They're extremely, hugely popular. And in my case, for instance, the FSB complained that just one video, one interview with me got about 2 million views, and they're entirely unhappy with that. So what the Russian investigative journalists are doing right now, they're trying to, and we are trying to document war crimes committed by Russian troops, investigate the inner circle of Vladimir Putin and his assets abroad, and basically trying to put pressure on the Kremlin to try to, well, we cannot stop the war, but at least we can try to do something to make people in the Kremlin think about the consequences of the war. And I think so far it's quite successful. We see that this amount of pressure from Russian journalists is having an effect. We see that people in Moscow, in big cities, they're reading and watching this stuff produced by Russian journalists in exile. And yeah, I think it is an important thing.
Thank you, Andrei. And I would implore all three of you, if you wanted to drop links to your work or your organization, to do so in the comment chat. Feel free to do that. Then let's go back to Ella. You talked a little bit about some of the anti-war protests. Maybe you could elaborate on the forms that these anti-war protests have taken, and perhaps you could provide us with a brief overview of both public and invisible protests. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. At first, we had street protests in Russia. We had massive street protests, and as I remember, the last information from over the info group, it's an NGO which helps those who face political persecutions in Russia. So the information was that more than 14,000 people were arrested on this kind of protests in different cities and towns in Russia, and it's not only these protests. They were not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg. They were everywhere throughout Russia in different cities and towns. And but unfortunately, quite fast this protest stopped, because the situation now is that if you go to a street protest in Russia, even if you do a single picket, which is still not prohibited, for the mass protest, you have to ask for a permission from the authorities if you want to organize a demonstration or any kind of activities like this. But if you do a single picket, it is still legal. But in like the situation now is that even if you do a single picket, you are immediately arrested by the police, and you can face big fines, 15 or 30 days in jail, this kind of punishment. So we don't have mass street protests in Russia now. It was only in February and the beginning of March. But we have all other kinds of protest activities. I can just describe what, for example, we are doing in Feminist Sense War Resistance. First of all, we're trying to unite. There are more than 45 feminist organizations in Russia. At least before the war, there were more than 45 different grassroots organizations in Russia. And at the beginning of the war, we started uniting these organizations and calling on feminists throughout Russia to unite and to think about our future actions against this war. What we're also doing, and I would say that this is a great thing, that journalists who are now abroad, that they provide this very important information about the war crimes, about Russian leaders. But what activists are doing, they are spreading this information inside of the Russian society. So that what, for example, we are doing, right? We have offline and online campaigns, and offline campaigns, it's literally when people publish, like print the articles from the independent media, which are now blocked in Russia. You can read them only if you use VPN, and not all Russians know how to use VPN, right? So our activists, they are printing these articles and just like put them into the post boxes, put them in public spaces, leave them in public spaces. So this kind of activism, providing of information and trying to show people that there is an alternative to the propaganda, to the official information, which is provided by the Russian government and the governmental media. And I would say, yeah, that we also have other kind of actions like sabotage again. And these actions, we should not underestimate them. They might not be that visible, but I would say that they can be very effective. And yeah, so this is what is going on now. There are also still people who are doing single pickets on the streets, but I would say that it's a absolute minority. Yeah, I would say that, and of course, there is a huge movement of Russian organizations who are trying to help those Ukrainians who were brought to Russia by force, because we have thousands of people like this, and so children, right? There are people with children, whole families, and we have Russian organizations like Помогаем уехать who helps these Ukrainians to leave Russia if they want, and to provide them with basic goods, like, you know, they don't have anything, they don't have documents, they don't have money, many of them don't have just, you know, food for their children. So this is what activists are trying to provide this Ukrainian refugees with. And also these organizations, many of these organizations also help those Russian activists who face persecution to leave Russia. They help with the lawyers and all this kind of things. So I would say, yeah, that's what is going on in anti-war activism in Russia right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Ella. And on that point, I had a recent discussion with you, Lolja, about some of the work that you've been doing and your experiences also with some of the Ukrainians who were forcefully removed from Ukraine and taken to Russia. Would you like to comment about that also, Lolja, before I ask you another question?
Yeah, I would also like to add to what was Ella saying, that there's another great part of the activist work that is being done in Russia is helping those people who don't want to go to army, and helping those young soldiers who were brought there by force, help their families. So activists are working in this sphere very, you know, hard, very much, and they provide information to the families of these people, of these young soldiers who were brought, like put into this war illegally, also to those young men who can be grabbed also in the streets in any second to be sent to this war. So because most of the people have lack of information of how to, you know, protect themselves from it. And we have activists who are providing lawyers and help, and who provide information to those people and actually explain to them that you have an opportunity, you have a right not to join this war, because there's no law right now which can make you go there. Because all of these military people, they're trying to trick men into going there. They're trying to make them, I don't know, to sign documents saying like, okay, just sign this, you won't go anywhere, and then bam, they are sent to the war zone. So I think this is a really important thing. And also I agree with all that Ella said about the protests. We have to remember that first 2 weeks when the war escalated, there were protests every day in different cities. And we can't say that police was mild during the first days, or they were tolerating this. No, they were brutal since the first very day of the protest. And people kept going out every day, despite that they saw that people get arrested, people face police brutality, people get huge fees, and people spend, you know, like 10, 20 days in jail for their actions, and still people were going. So I think that those people who were going out these 2 weeks, they are very brave, because they knew what they're risking, and they still decided to go and make these risks for themselves. And it's amazing how diverse these protests were, because there were not only young people, how sometimes media likes to, you know, show it. It was different range of ages, backgrounds. It was students, it was older people, it was everyone, very diverse crowd. And speaking about helping Ukrainian people who were actually basically kidnapped from the occupied zones and brought by force to Russia. And right now they're, they are thrown all over the country because they don't have a chance to choose where they will be brought. So these military people just take these people from Mariupol, from other regions, and they just put them somewhere in some tiny cities or villages in really horrible conditions where sometimes people are disinformated and they don't know if they actually have a right to leave that places, because you can imagine that these people experienced war crimes, and they also went through this system of so-called filtration camps. That's how the Russian military calls it, because before these people are brought to Russia, they go through this humiliating and violent camps, like filtration camps, where sometimes they get, not sometimes, but often they get tortured, they get threatened. This is, I think it's an important part of war crimes that is happening, these filtration camps itself. So people are shocked, people are tired, and they sometimes don't know if they actually can leave. But the trick is that they can leave. At least by now, there is nothing that can stop them from leaving Russia or even going back to Ukraine through Europe. And I volunteer in an organization which works on the Russian-Estonian border. So they help people who appear to be like Ukrainian refugees who appear to be all over Russia to go through this Estonian border, which is now one of the most major, the most popular, to say so, routes, because it's very easy to go to St. Petersburg from wherever you are in Russia, like kind of easy. And then from St. Petersburg, it's only 2 hours to this Estonian border. So a lot of people are going through this border every day. And actually, Estonia government and like municipal people, officials, they don't actually help at all. So all this work is on the shoulders of a grassroots activists, because first Estonia, they were helping Ukrainian people who crossed this border. But after several weeks, they said, oh, so we don't have any free space left for the refugees. So we're closing our refugee welcoming center, and we're just ignoring that people keep coming every day, because people don't know that there are no place left, and people will still come because it's major routes. So the government ignored it, but the activists didn't. And still for months, activists worked 24 hours a day with no weekends, meeting people day, night, afternoon, morning, like 24 hours, because these people need help. And a lot of people who are helping, they are Russian people who live in Estonia, for example. And at the same time, there are Russian activists who are in St. Petersburg, who are in different regions of Russia. So they curate these refugees so they be able to travel safely to the border, because there's another huge problem is human trafficking, which is, bursting right now, because any war is a magnet to the human trafficking business, to the criminals who do human trafficking. So for us, it's also very important, especially to the feminist anti-war resistance, to do materials and to provide information how to protect these refugees from human trafficking right now. And like several days ago, we released a huge material for the volunteers, for the coordinators, for the refugees themselves. What is human trafficking, how to avoid it in this particular war circumstances, in this particular situation.
Thank you, Lolja. Can you just briefly mention to us the name of the organization, the volunteer organization that you're working with?
The name is Friends of Mariupol. Mariupol is this city who was completely destroyed by Russian force. So you can find it online, and I think I will share the link.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Andrei. You've heard what the other two panelists have said about the anti-war movement, especially in terms of protesters and providing information to Russians about knowing their rights, that the fact that they don't have to go into this war as soldiers, also providing information to Ukrainians who have been illegally taken into Russia. How can they get back to Russia and so on? But what is your take with regards to the anti-war movement within the security sector? Because since the February escalation in Ukraine, you've publicized the number of accounts of purges and disorder within the FSB. So tell us a little bit about the significance of some of your research that you've conducted.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I wanted to say that an anti-war activist movement was extremely important for journalists, because right now it's really difficult for Russian media in exile to work with reporters which are still in Russia. You cannot, if you say based in Rostov or in Novosibirsk, and you like pitch a story for, say, Medusa, the most popular Russian media in exile, you might face a lot of legal problems because you might be accused of helping a foreign agent, or you might be accused of state treason, or you don't, or maybe of helping to spread fake news about the war. Which means that for Russian media in exile, it's a new challenge where to find new people to give information about what is really going on in the country. And right now we rely a lot on activists because they know what is going on in particular sectors, with soldiers, with their families, with Ukrainians who were forced to move into Russia. So the help provided by activists was really absolutely priceless. Regarding your question, unfortunately, I cannot give you here any good news. Yes, we see that some people in the Russian military are being quite unhappy with the way the war goes, but they are not critical of the war because they want the war to stop. They are critical of Putin because they believe that he's not that radical we want him to be. That's the biggest problem. Right now, the Russian army is getting more and more adjusted to the war, and they just think and they criticize the Kremlin of being too soft. Actually, what they believe in, they believe that the war with Ukraine and NATO was inevitable sooner or later, but they believe that this war cannot be only about liberation of Donbass. So basically what they demand an all-out war. And that's where you have your criticism from the military. These people are not, they cannot give you any anti-war movement, unfortunately. Even if they believe that they sustain heavy casualties, they're getting angry, but they are not getting angry at Putin, who started the war. They are angry at the generals, maybe. They are angry at the Ukrainians and NATO, and that's it. They have this feeling that we need to fight this war. The war might last for years, and they need to adjust. That's a problem. So if you have any kind of dispute between, say, or among the military or the security services, well, yes, we had some elements of that, especially in the beginning of the war, because the military wanted to find someone to blame, especially in the first stage of the war, why things went so wrong for the Russian military. And they blamed the security services and the intelligence agencies. But now, after so many months passed, it looks like they just adjusted. And again, just I'm stressing the same point, that they are reading themselves to a very long war.
Thank you for that, Andrei. Let me ask you another question, if you could unmute for me. Earlier in the war, we also heard a number of reports that a key goal for the Kremlin was to get rid of President Zelensky, and apparently the Wagner group had a number of members in Kiev who were charged with taking out President Zelensky, and the Ukrainians claimed that they were able to foil that attempt. because of intelligence that was leaked from Moscow to their intelligence services. What do you make of those claims?
Yes, what actually happened is that in the beginning of the war, Putin really believed that the Ukrainian state was extremely fragile and would collapse within days. He also believed his security services, and specifically the fifth service of the FSB, which is in charge of conducting intelligence operations in Ukraine, that these people could give him political support for the invasion in Ukraine. And that completely failed, as we know. But Putin believed that he just need to send his tanks into Ukraine, and here you have your coup d'etat, or just hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians on the streets demanding, I don't know, the replacement for Zelensky and all of that. It never happened. So what is happening now, and it started in the end of April, the Russian military understood that they couldn't rely anymore on the hope that the military operation might provoke some political crisis in Kiev. This hope they completely abandoned. Now they believe that they need to conduct a conventional war. For that, they need conventional spies. That is why the influence of the fifth service of the FSB, which promoted this political solution to the crisis, to the war actually, their positions are now not really strong, and now it is a military intelligence which is in charge of collecting intelligence in Ukraine. And of course, I remember all these rumors, especially in the beginning of the war, that there were some rogue elements inside of the FSB leaking information to the Ukrainians. I would say that we didn't find any proof of that. But there were a collection, well, I remember there was a collection of letters supposedly written by people inside of the FSB. And of course, there were some people who were not really happy when the war started. But again, unfortunately, now they adjusted to this new reality. And they sort of they understand that they just need to fight this war no matter what.
Thank you, Andrei. We'll ask you some more questions momentarily, but let's first turn back to Ella. Ella, protesters in Russia, if you want to talk about Belarus also, you're welcome. But protesters seem to be protesting without major results in terms of changing the course of government policy regarding the war. So what would you say is next for the anti-war movement, and what are their main goals?
Yes, thank you for this question. Actually, this question I would love to discuss with Lolja and Andrei, because for me, it's a mystery. It's a very difficult question. What we do next and what we can do if we're such a small group and we have very limited opportunities, very limited possibilities, and we can't really influence the government, which is not Putin would not hear his own people. He's not interested in this. He's very much involved in his war. So yeah, for me, it's a question how to do sustainable activism in this circumstances, how to find better tools of protest and resistance. So yeah, I would just propose to discuss this question, as I personally I don't have answer to this. The feminist anti-war resistance, we just continue what we are doing, and it doesn't seem that our movement is going to, I don't know, to disappear in the closest times, because we have new members. We have a big support from the international community, from feminist organizations from the UK, the US, Italy, Sweden, and many other countries. So we are developing our movement. But this big question about our goals, our tools of resistance, it's still vital for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Lolja. Feel free to piggyback on that, but I would like to ask you also. You know, we've witnessed large-scale violence against women during the Russia-Ukraine war, especially in places like Bucha. Given your background and work on gender violence, can you talk to us about gender issues related to this conflict and the link with broader systemic issues in Russian society?
Yes, sure. Of course, I agree with Ella that trying to build up some sustainable practices in activism is crucial and very important, because we don't want our movement and people in our movement to get burned out, you know, in a month or two, because the amount of work that we have to do, the stress and everything is outrageous, and we need to do our work sustainably to like be able to continue doing it as long as it takes, as long as the war goes. And actually, even if the war stops today, let's imagine this kind of scenario, we will still have a lot of work to do, because we will still have these hundreds of thousands of people, like millions of people who were affected by this war. And personally, I think Ella agrees, and we discussed it in our feminist anti-war resistance group, that the work that we will have to do after the war ends, it's enormous, because we need to help these people whose lives were ruined, whose destinies were completely ruined, whose cities were ruined. And I think it's a crucial part of an anti-war movements as well, to work with what happens after. And speaking about the links and about the violence, I think it's like, for me and for all of the feminist activists and for all the people who were engaged in working with the subject of violence in Russia, this like puzzle was complete when the war in Ukraine has started, because for years of Putin's reign, to say so, in Russia, we've seen the constant normalization of violence in all kinds of spheres: domestic violence, gender-based violence, violence in the family. At the same time, violence in the army, even before 2014, when the war in Ukraine has started, still a lot of young people were afraid to go to army, because the problem of violence in the army was crucial, and it's still happening. At the same time, we had, of course, police violence, government, state violence, so police brutality, which we face. And like 10 years ago, during the Bolotnaya protests, and during all the protests that we have during the last 10 years. And all of these different violence in different spheres were constantly normalized by the government. So the government was giving us this huge signal that the violence will be tolerated in Russia. Doesn't matter which kind of violence, it will be tolerated. And for me, like the turning point was when I realized that we are going to some kind of a huge tragedy, when we had this really bright case a year ago, when we had large oppositional protests in January 1 year ago. And we had this case when a police officer, Rosguardia officer, kicked a peaceful woman in the streets in the stomach, and it was caught on the camera. So millions of people saw it, and nothing happened to this guy. So the police violence crime was actually captured on the video really clearly, when you can't say that, oh, we don't know who it was, what really happened. We see how police officer kicks woman in the stomach, and nothing happened to him. We don't know the name of this guy. This woman faced oppression, and she was threatened by police when she tried to, make a criminal case against this police officer. At the same time, no one uncovered his name. He wasn't fired. Nothing happened to him. So it was one of the major signals to say this will be tolerated and it's okay to, you know, make this violence. What am I saying? And all of the feminists see this link, that all this was kind of preparation for this larger scale violence that we are seeing now in Ukraine towards Ukrainian people. And of course, for me, it's like, you know, when we've seen these brutal murders in Bucha and Kramatorsk, in all these cities in Ukraine, when people were tortured, peaceful citizens were tortured and murdered by Russian army, people from abroad get shocked by these images and say, how can a person do such things? How can a soldier do such things to the peaceful citizen? But I see it differently, and like we feminists, we see it differently. What's like, because imagine what stops a person from doing such crime towards like the enemy, when this person were allowed to do these crimes towards its family members or towards a person like a civil, like peaceful protesters in his own hometown. And we know that people who were beating the shit out of, I'm sorry, peaceful protesters in Russia, they were sent to the war in Ukraine as well. So people who are doing these murders and doing these tortures, they have already tortured people in Russia. So I think it was the way how our government like prepared this violence and how they like helped it to happen. So yeah, I think, and the sad part is that feminists, as always, like during history, were saying about it constantly, that this legitimization of the violence will lead us to this huge, big problem, to the war or the greater violence. But of course, nobody was listening.
So thank you. Yeah, the violence, in other words, that we've witnessed in Ukraine is an extension of the endemic violence, the systematic violence that we've seen also in Russia, violence that's largely been tolerated up to now. Andrei, let's turn to you for now. You've talked a little bit about what's happening within the FSB, unity, disunity. Can you talk to us about the security sector at large? What's happening? I don't know how closely you follow the military and other branches of the security sector, but I'd love to hear from you what you think has been happening over the last 3 months in terms of unity or disunity between these different services. Thank you.
Yes, it is. It's a very good question. Everybody asking what is going on with all these security agencies and the military, especially because what we've seen over the last 6-7 years is a militarization of the Russian society, and we sort of didn't pay it enough attention. And I remember that the very first time, well, the Kremlin decided to have these rehearsals of the military parade of the 9th of May, and all these tanks rolled on the streets of Moscow at night and stayed there, and Muscovites got really excited in their thousands. And that was the very first sign that actually people love these kind of things. They love these tanks. They love to bring their kids to watch these tanks on Moscow streets, which is not the thing you do not expect tanks to be stationed on streets of cities. And that's something what the Russian military understood. After that, there was a very successful propaganda campaign of the Russian military when they promoted the war in Syria. And there was a train with Syrian trophies. And this train traveled all over all the country. Like 80 towns were visited by this train, and everywhere it went with cheerful crowds of people. And of course, again, it added to more and more militarization. When we saw the Russian military building the biggest church in the country, painted green for some reasons, And again, it was a big PR success for the Russian military. When the military went into Russian schools, we got special lessons about the Russian military. We got a special big organization, the youth army. And again, it's getting more and more and more important. We understand that now the Russian army is playing a big role in the Russian ideology. They have a say about the Russian history, about the church, about the Russian foreign policy. So unfortunately, what happened in February was well prepared. I completely agree with Ella and with Lola. It was something the Russian army was, and the Kremlin was thinking probably for years. But when the war started, of course, when you have this identity, which was inflated by militarization of the society, of course, the army did want to be humiliated by what was happening during the first 3-4 weeks of the war. And at the same time, we got a new development. We got these Telegram channels. And we tend to think that Telegram channels mostly used by liberal-minded people. Of course not. Lots of people who are very pro-Kremlin and pro-war, they also have Telegram channels. And these channels are extremely popular. They have like hundreds of thousands of followers. So what happened after the war started is that lots of veterans of the Russian military launched their own channels, and they created something very new for Russia. They created some sort of civic military society on Telegram. And this new space is not under control of the Ministry of Defense or the generals. It's mostly run by people, I would say majors, maybe colonels of the army. And these people tend to be even more radical than the generals. The generals might think that, say, an all-out war is not a really good thing. But for colonels and majors who see what is going on with the regiments in Ukraine, how many people got killed, and they believe that, of course, they were killed not because the army made a mistake, but because they were betrayed by some politicians, the usual line always used by the military in every country, but in Russia, of course, it's a very common thing. These people are radicalizing the military even more. So you have this new thing, this new civil society inside the military, mostly expressing themselves on Telegram, on YouTube, and other social media, demanding for more. And to be honest, I just don't know what we can do about it, because it seems that this thing is given more support for the war, but also it put the Kremlin under more pressure. And we all need to think what we can do about it, how to get these people back to being human beings. What was really sort of important for me is to see how the military discussed the fate of the prisoners of the war, especially Ukrainians who were taken prisoners after the Azovstal was attacked. That was absolutely astonishing, because lots of these military types were asked the prisoners of the war being executed, which is against all logic, especially the military logic. The military always understand that we need to have this and treat prisoners of war well, humanly, because they need to swap these people on their people. It's a common military logic, but not in this case. In this case, we have the military sphere and the military society, if we can call it that, really radicalized. I don't know how long it could last, but unfortunately, it is the case right now.
May I just add just a small thing? I think Andrei meant when he started talking about the church, he meant the main cathedral of the Russian armed forces. And I really encourage everyone Google it, because there is a good article about in Wikipedia in English. It's such a symbol of the militarization, of violence, of all the ideology of Russia of the last years, because it's a big temple, like a huge one. It's in honor of the resurrection of the Christ, but it's also dedicated to the 75th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War, as well as the military feats of the Russian people in all wars. So it's like the church of all wars, and it's in colors of this temple is in the colors of a military uniform, and it really speaks for itself. It's just like a symbol of what was going on in Russia in this huge preparation for this big war of the last years. So yeah, I think it's a great illustration for everything we were talking about today.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think those are some good points also. Let me ask you perhaps both, Ella, and Andrei, what do you think, how do you think the US, UK, and EU should reach Russian audiences? And what should be our message to Russians, knowing that there are still many who would like some credible information about what exactly is happening. Let's maybe start with Andrei. I know you have to jump off in a minute, so let me just hear your answer. We'll turn to Ella and we'll ask another question to Lolja. Thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking about this right from the day one, like what could be done to reach those in Russia who want to hear what is really going on in Ukraine. And it looks like there are several things. First, fortunately, the Russian government decided to block Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, but not YouTube. And YouTube remains maybe the biggest thing in terms of disseminating information uncensored about the war. And that is why not only Russian media now in exile are present on YouTube, but also political organizations like Navalny's organization or Khodorkovsky organizations. They are all moving into online journalism, and they all have YouTube presence because it is something people actually watch in the millions. That's one thing. The other thing which the US and European countries could do is there is a huge demand on stories from Ukraine about the human side of this war. The problem is that right now Russian media in exile cannot send lots of reporters into Ukraine for obvious reasons. But there are lots of reporting from and conducted by Western media, and they still have some following in Russia. People trust Western media more, for instance, than Ukrainian media. And that means that there is an opportunity here. If we can get stories published by the New York Times, The Guardian, Daily Telegraph in Russian, available for the Russian audience, it might be something. And I've been talking about this with some colleagues in European countries. They are now trying to do something like that. For instance, Finnish media, they are launching several projects, translating their stories into Russian and making them available. The problem is how to actually to give this information to the Russians, where to look in for this kind of information. So maybe we need to think about one place and people would know where to go to actually to read human stories about what is going on in Ukraine. But that's something which could be done and could be done right now.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ella, can I just ask, if possible, if you could just mention, if there are other mediums also to reach Russians. I'm thinking Viber, although I'm not sure what the status is of Viber right now. And then maybe also specifically say something about what do you think should be our message also to Russians? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. yeah, also Telegram is not blocked in Russia still. So, and I would say that many Russians use Telegram as a source of reliable news, any kind of information. So I would say that's, yeah, I would say that also the journalists, the activists who want to communicate with Russians, they can use this channel of communication. But I think it's just a great idea to make the website with an alternative view, with the articles from different international journals and magazines, sorry, and investigative media. And to make all this in Russia, I think this can really help. And yeah, I believe that it can, the information about this media, about this website can spread in Russia, you know, like a word of the mouth. So, but I also want to say one thing about Russian propaganda. As I see now, many people don't really understand how it works. They think it's like Soviet propaganda. So they think that Russian propaganda is trying to build some kind of a picture, some kind of a view, the view of the world for Russian people. And the thing is that I would say that it's not working like this. I would say that Russian propaganda is very much encouraging mistrust. And this is why it's so, this is why the messages in this propaganda can be very contradictory. And people are sometimes shocked that, you know, today Margarita Simonyan says one thing, but tomorrow she has a completely different thing. And, you know, these messages are super contradictory. But this is I would say that this is the idea of all this propaganda. It's not that you should trust us, but not these people on the West. The idea of this propaganda in Russia now is that you should not trust anyone. You know, every single person lies to you. Every single media lies. You know, we are dependent on the state, on the Russian government. Yeah, that's true. So, but there are other media who are dependent on, you know, British government, American government. So they lie too. So you just choose, you know, you just like, there is no real choice for you. You know, it's just like millions of lies, and you can, you know, somehow survive in this. So you can just not believe anyone. And I would say this is the main message of the propaganda now. Do not believe anyone. So I would say that those persons, those journalists who want to, you know, like to communicate with Russians, they have to think how to deal with this mistrust. They have to share the real stories of the people, right? Or if they share investigations, they have to show how exactly they gained the information in this, like every single detail, how exactly they can prove that this information is real, how exactly actually the journalistic investigation works, how it looks like. Because I would say that Russians, they don't have, in general, in mass, they don't have this information that there are actually rules of journalistic investigations, which makes this investigation reliable, you know. And it's not like all journalists just make up some things, you know, and then share them in their texts. It works differently. So I would say that this is important. This continuous work with mistrust, and yeah, I would say this is one of the most important things if you want to do this work.
Thank you, Ella. Yeah, and it's, I mean, it's sad to see that many educated in Western countries are now starting to say the same thing. Well, who do we trust when we look at this war? I mean, it's not that complicated at the same time. But Lolja, let's turn to you. We have a question from the audience. I'll just ask you to briefly answer that, so I get a chance to ask you one final question. But I have a question here from Alice Kostetsu, so from the Ratsu Forum. She says to both of you, many thanks for your presentations and congratulations on your work. I was wondering, what is the official status of Ukrainians forcibly taken to Russia? Are they considered refugees? And also, how are they perceived by Russians? Thank you both.
Thank you for this question. Actually, I don't think that the procedure of bringing these people to Russia can be called legal, because it's actually kidnapping. You can't call it deportation or something, because these people were just took by the armed people, armed soldiers, and brought by force to Russia. Right now in Russia, they have options. They can, apply for the political asylum as refugees. Sometimes they have possibilities to get Russian passports. We saw these examples where Ukrainian people are, you can say, forced to get this Russian passport. I think they get manipulated and they get psychologically pressured to get this passport and to stay in Russia. Also, it's important to say that we have a really terrible conditions for the refugees in Russia, and it was even before this war, because it's really hard to get this status, official status of the refugee in Russia. It was for years we faced this problem. But we think, like me and other helping organizations, that Russian state is interested in keeping these people inside Russia. They are not interested in them moving out to Europe or going back to Ukraine. So they are trying to, trick them. They're trying to scare them. Sometimes they disinformate them, saying that you can't go to Europe because you don't have documents, which is false, because I personally and thousands of volunteers help people to cross this border. They can go through the border, they can escape Russia. But local people who do this work of, manipulating, they try to disinformate these people. They try to scare them that nobody waits for you in Europe. Nobody will get financial help for you there. Nobody will care about your wounds. So they just make people stay. I think to use them after in their political, things, to manipulate those people and to say, okay, see, we saved millions of lives. We brought them from this terrible war. We saved them. I take this in commas, we saved them from this nationalists, from this fascists, and now they're safe in Russia. I'm totally 100% sure that they want to do that. And right now we are standing on the position that it's not safe for people with Ukrainian passport, for Ukrainian people to be in Russia, because we don't know what will happen next. We don't know if they will be able to leave the country tomorrow. Things can happen really quick. So we advise, of course, to move from Russia, because anything can happen. And Russian government lies to Ukrainian people. Russian government is not trustworthy right now, especially if you are Ukrainian. So, of course, it's important to help these people leave. But there is another side of a problem, because sometimes people are so scared and they are so tired that they are, I can't use the word happy, but they feel lucky to be in Russia, in a place where they don't have bombs flying above their heads. So they feel kind of safe. Yeah, they feel kind of safe, and it takes a lot of activist work, a lot of really, fragile, gentle work to try to explain those people why do they need to be really safe to move out from Russia, and not to trust what these governmental people are saying to them.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there is also a problem with children. There are thousands. There are thousands of Ukrainian children, the orphans from the orphanage, right, who were also brought to Russia by force, and now they naturalize these children, so they try to make Russian citizens out of them. The status of these children is in a shadow. We don't know how legal all this. Of course, it's completely illegal. It's one of the signs of genocide, when you take someone's children and try to make them your own, to make them speak your language, adjust to your culture, and so on and so on. But yeah, there's also this problem, and I'm not sure if how activists can work with this issue, and are there even activists who are doing this? Because you can, an adult person, they can choose for themselves, right? They can choose to cross the border, or I don't know, to stay in Russia. But children, it's a completely different story. And I want to say that this situation needs much more attention, and I'm shocked that it's not really discussed in the media. Yeah.
I agree with you, Ella, there. I was contacted at some point by a journalist who wanted to write an article about atrocities, and I highlighted this issue in particular of the children. I don't know if the figures were something like over 100,000, at least that the Ukrainian ministry put out. This was at least 2 months ago, on how many children have been kidnapped and forcibly removed to Russia, because that, at least in my view, is also an act of genocide. You take people from one identity group and put it in another identity group where you basically condition them, in a manner that they would have to start and think that they're from a different group. But anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But I agree with you, the media has not paid enough attention to these children who have been forcibly removed. Lolja, let me ask you a final question, just very briefly. I know you were at the conference recently in Vilnius, where you joined other anti-war activists. You had some concerns also about some of the things that you've seen there. I don't know if you would like to briefly just tell us about some of the Russian activists that you've encountered in the Baltics, and maybe just share something about your experience about this conference in Vilnius. Thank you.
Yes, I think that I can describe shortly. There was a huge anti-war conference in Vilnius, where a lot of kind of popular oppositional people gathered to discuss anti-war issues. But I was very critical about what I saw here, because I've seen a lot of men who are over 50 in this program, and I didn't saw almost any woman. It was okay, it was kind of 30 people speaking in this conference, and it was only 5 women, and only 1 person in the program was a part of grassroots activist movement. So mostly it was really privileged people who live abroad. It was mostly Russian people, so there were no any ethnic diversity there. There were no native people who live in Russia represented there. So it was weird, and it was kind of, those people were talking about the future of Russia, but I think they failed in their ideas, because how can you build the bright future of free Russia when you can't even see that you don't have women, you don't have people of color, you don't have the most vulnerable groups in your panel. You don't see the basic, power dynamics. You don't see the basic issues of discriminations and inequalities. So I don't know, but I was not surprised, because that's what you see, that's what happens in the, more liberal oppositional sphere. And me and Ella, we're more leftist people. I'm personally an anarchist, leftist anarchist. So, but what I see while I'm in Europe, temporarily, I hope, because I really want to go back to my hometown. I really want to have this possibility, because I think I was kicked out of my own home. I see that activist grassroots movements, especially, they do the most of the work. So they don't do blah, blah, blah on the panels and conferences. They spend their time doing this hard work every day. They help refugees. They organize, partisan protests. They organize sabotages in Russia. They organize protests in Europe. They help people who come to Europe with terrible wounds, Ukrainian people from war who made a horrible trip through all the Russia to get to Europe, to get help and to be safe. So they're doing all this work. And I think it's really important for me to say, and I really want to say it out loud, that when we are speaking about what can people in Europe do to stop this war, I think it's really important to push your own governments. Because what we have seen a lot of anti-war protests all over Europe, where people are coming to the Russian embassies and saying, we are against, stop the war, we are against this war. But these protests actually are very comfortable to the local governments of European countries, because they doesn't criticize the local governments who also, you know, have some kind of responsibilities in this war, because like the representatives of these countries, they were shaking hands with Putin, they still buying gas and fossil fuels from Putin, they still funding this war in some case, they still don't do this embargo thing, and they still try to like stay away from it. They still don't arm Ukraine properly in the situation when Ukraine cries for help. I mean, they literally need help in arming, and Europe sometimes, like most of the time, they just ignore this. And I think what the activists from Europe, from US can do, just to do protests which are directed to their own governments, to push them to raise these issues and to make them feel uncomfortable so they can finally do something crucial to stop this war.
Thank you, Lolja. I know Ella is eager to jump in here, so I'll give you the final word, but I want to thank you also for a very powerful closing there, Lolja. Thank you. Ella?
Just a very short adding. I just wanted to add that I forgot to say, this is true that the representative of ethnic minorities in Russia, they actually became a very important part of anti-war activism in Russia. I would say that they found, I would say that what like stimulated them to unite and to resist this war is this terrible hypocrisy by the Russian government, because the Russian government says that one of the reasons for this war was to help those Russians who are discriminated in Ukraine, right? They can't speak their language, they can't, you know, they face, I don't know, any kind of xenophobia and so on and so on. But the thing is that in Russia, we have more than 190 different peoples, right? Like different ethnic groups, and non-Slavic also. I think many people really forget about this, including our liberal opposition activists and politicians. So we have this this huge diversity of different ethnic minorities, and the thing is that these minorities actually face discrimination in Russia every day. First of all, in our constitution, it is said that there is the main people, which is Slavic Russians, and there are other peoples, you know, like which are also important, but still they are not state. It's called государства образующие, state organizing, something like this. I can't really translate it, and I don't understand this logic, but still, like, the state is built on one people and others were just like, you know, they just joined in a way. So this is the logic of our new constitution, which was renewed in 2020 by Putin and Putin's government. And yeah, these minorities, they see this and they see that their heritage is being destroyed in Russia, their languages are dying, and they can't really speak them and they can't learn them in schools and so on and so on. And yeah, when they saw this, that our government is ready to outbreak the whole war in a different country to support Slavic Russians, but don't care about, you know, other peoples in their own country, that really that stimulated them to organize organizations like Buryats Against War. This I think you can find even in English, the information about this movement, Kalmyks Against the War, and many, many others. And now they are trying to unite, and also the feminist anti-war resistance, we also collaborate with this movement. And I think they can be one of the most, they could become in future one of the most important forces in the anti-war resistance in Russia. Yeah.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the issues that both of you highlighted, especially how we need to do more in terms of inclusivity when talking about what's happening in Russia and the future of Russia. Include more younger people, more women, more people with from different ethnic groups also in Russia to be part of this conversation, because there's also a discussion about the president, is also a discussion about the future of Russia. Yeah, it's been a real honor to have both of you, and also Andrei in his absence, he had to leave, unfortunately, on this panel. I think we did well on the diversity front, I think, and bring in some young voices. So I'm happy about that. And I also just want to say that for me, it's really important to listen to and hear from Russians like yourself, you know, because again, it demonstrates that this is not, quote unquote, Russia's war as by and large, but it's Putin's war and those who support Putin, you know, and we need to highlight the voices who are speaking out against what is happening, and provide them with a platform and make sure we're able to share some of this information with some of your fellow Russians back home. So thank you to both of you and to Andrei.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to mention one thing, if you don't mind, if you have,
yes,
if we still have 1 minute. Speaking about inclusion, I think we have some work to be done, because we have like Belarusian people named in the name of our panel, but we actually didn't have anybody to speak about it. I totally agree with Ella that we can't speak for Belarusian people. We need to have them represented to speak for themselves and to speak about what's happening in their country and about their anti-war resistance movements and about their political prisoners and all the issues. So I think it will be great if you will organize a panel and invite Belarusian speakers to it.
We did have someone invited, someone very important, who had to drop out, unfortunately, but and we have had a few Belarusians on our panels also. You'll be happy to hear about that. So but definitely for the future also. Thank you to both. Thank you to our audience.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.